Hey Bruins, I'm Angela Scales, the Senior Director of Bruin Connections and Alumni Career Programs here at UCLA. We're excited to have you with us for our newest episode in the Bruin Career Insights series. Each and every one of these episodes is powered by membership, so thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible. If you're interested in upgrading your membership, you'll see a link in the live chat. If you're watching this episode, you're probably looking for resources and information on how to prepare yourself to re-enter the workforce after an extended leave, and maybe you're struggling with navigating the job search process. Today, our speaker is going to provide tips on how to frame that gap in your resume and how to communicate your transferable skills. She'll also answer questions you might have about navigating the general career search process. Feel free to ask your questions throughout the episode. Just enter them in the live chat. Our featured speaker tonight is Vicki Rothman. Vicki graduated from UCLA in 1985 and went on to receive her master's in career counseling from Cal State Northridge. She currently manages the Career Services Center at Santa Monica College and runs a private practice for clients of all ages at all career stages. So let's get started. Vicki, tell us a little bit about your UCLA experience and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, hi Angela, thank you, and hi to all the fellow Bruin alumni. Really pleased to be here. So you might want to take some notes while we're going through, because I actually have done some extra research to come up with different things that you can talk about in interviews that you might want to jot notes down. I went to UCLA, as Angela said, from 1981 to 85. So in case you're sitting there calculating, I am 55 years old. I came in as a performing music major. I played the flute. And my sophomore year, I took a sociology class with a visiting professor. I think his name was Barney McGrain. He was an off-the-wall dude, but he was fascinating. And then I stepped out of UCLA for my junior year abroad. And during that year, I came to the very tough realization that I was never going to make it as a performing music major. I played the flute. I came back to UCLA, zoomed into the sociology major, and in 1 year completed it so that I could graduate. Went on for a, believe it or not, career in banking. It was not the right career for me. And I went to see a career counselor. And we did all the assessments and we had lots of fun discussions. And after we'd done everything, I looked at him and I said, tell me about your profession, because that's what I want to do. And at that time, there was only 2 master's degrees in America. One was at Cal State Northridge and one was at Columbia. I was not prepared to pick up and move. So I went to Northridge. And that's how I ended up with my master's degree. And I have fortunately been employed and in the field ever since.
Great. Well, as you can imagine, this topic is really popular. In fact, we had over 400 alumni who RSVP'd and submitted questions. So we know that there are a lot of different types of leave, whether it was an extended leave to raise children or maybe care for an elderly parent, or maybe someone, started a company and then decided to shut it down and is going back into an industry. And so what would you say are some of the major challenges in general when you're re-entering the workforce after some type of leave?
I think that our major challenge, believe it or not, is ourselves. We get into our own way, because when you step out of the workforce, you end up living a lot of your life internally, especially if you've been home raising kids, or unfortunately, if you've been ill or something's happened that's taken you out of the workforce. The idea of going back to the workforce becomes really overwhelming, and we start to get into our own way. But more than that, like a lot of times when my clients call me, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they say, I've been thinking and trying to figure things out, and I can't do it myself. And so it's really great to start processing information by talking to other people and starting to look back into the workforce. It's not going to happen overnight. It does take time. It takes a lot of planning. And one thing I always like people to think about is, you don't plan a vacation overnight. Well, maybe some of you do, but most of you don't plan a vacation overnight. Most of you don't figure out what car you're going to buy or home you're going to buy. It takes time. And to sort of re-enter the workforce, you have to position yourself, start thinking about things, and make a plan to get back in.
So that actually leads me into my next question of kind of, as someone, when someone decides, okay, I want to get back into the workforce, should they start with kind of that piece of self-reflection and talking to others, or do they start with the resume, or kind of what's the priority to start first?
Oh, I don't want to give too long of answers. I want you guys to know, my fellow Bruin alumni, I did a tremendous amount of research on my own. I talked to, before we did this today, I talked to people who are recruiters. I did my own research. I talked to other career counselors. I really wanted to bring you guys the best information. So what I want you to think about is everyone says to themselves, I've got to get the perfect resume because that perfect resume is going to get me back into the workforce and that's going to get me my job. And that's just not true. So really what you want to do is figure out what is it I want to do next. So I know I did get to look at a lot of the questions, which was really great. One of the running themes were women who pulled out of the workforce for 10, 15, 20 years to raise their kids. And I think for you, especially women, and actually anyone who's been out of the workforce, you have to think about what it is that you want to do when you're going to go back into the workforce. A lot of people think, well, I was a lawyer, I want to go be a lawyer. One person wrote in and said something about wanting to get back into Wall Street after pulling out of the workforce for a few years. And so it's really good to have an idea of what you want to do because you're never going to send a resume and a cover letter cold. You actually want to be prepared. And the way that you get prepared, and you can tell me if I'm giving too much now and you want to answer other questions, but the way that you get prepared is you figure out what you might want to do. And you can narrow that down to one or two options. And then you start calling people that might know people that are in that profession or people that you know. Or if you were out of the workforce, you can actually contact old colleagues that might still be in the specific career that you might want to go into or that you might want to go back to. Because the goal right now when you're first going back and you're thinking about things is talk to as many people as you can, join professional organizations, start going to conferences, start taking classes. In other words, you have to gear yourself up so that you have more information to put on the resume and you have more information to talk about yourself. So yes, you need to self-reflect unless you already know exactly what you want to do.
So in terms of that industry piece, you mentioned the conferences. Is that an important piece for any applicant in this situation, realizing that potentially the industry that they want to return to may have evolved and changed since they left the workforce?
That's a really good question. So one of the things that the recruiters told me when I asked them, and I was sort of like, oh, but then I thought, well, they're probably right, is when we talk about recency is not more than 18 months ago. So I noticed in a lot of questions, people had been out of the workforce for more than probably 2 years was like the minimum that people were talking about. So unfortunately, that means that you've lost your recency in the field. And the way to get back in and to kind of remind people of who you are and what those skills are that you bring is by joining those professional organizations and by going to conferences, because it's a way of meeting people and it's a way of networking again.
So I noticed that a lot of the questions we got were in thinking about how to frame the gap and how to talk about the time that they were away. And so an interesting question we had gotten was kind of around how could the skills or the experience that one had while they were in a leave be seen as an opportunity or an asset for an employer? Kind of, is there a way to highlight or talk about those pieces, whether it's in an interview or in a cover letter?
I think from my experience, well, I'm gonna give you a two-part answer. I always teach my clients that really what you want to do is get in front of another person so that your resume and your cover letter is not going in cold, but you actually have a relationship with someone. A lot of companies, and I'm sure these are things that you probably just don't remember if you haven't been in the workforce for a while, but people like to hire people that they already have familiarity with. There was even a period of time, and I don't know if it's still happening, to be honest, where an employer might say, hey, Vicki, do you have any friends that do this that you might want to employ? And to be honest, when I'm hiring at Santa Monica College, the first thing I do is go to all my part-time career counselors and I say, guys, I have a need. Put word out, and then they have to put it into a portal. So the application goes into a portal, and then they'll email me and they'll say, John, Jane, Dawn and Sue have all put applications in, so I know to look for them. And so it's the same thing. You want to reconnect with people because that's how you're going to start getting your foot in the door. I don't personally think that you need to cover your gap in employment in a cover letter, but I think you do need to cover that gap in employment in a resume. And you tell me when, and we'll go into that. We can do that later. We can do that now, whatever you want. But I've got very specific advice for how to address like different reasons that you might have pulled out of the workforce?
Yeah, let's address that, because I think that was actually the largest kind of theme in the questions that we got from Bruins was, where does it belong? Is it in the cover letter, in the resume, in the interview? Kind of just what are the ways in which you cover it so that you're not hiding it, but how do you communicate the gap in your experience?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's a scary thing. Like, what do you say and how much do you say? So number one, you want to be honest, but you don't want to disclose too much. So let's first go to all the women that pulled out of the workforce. Women, you're going to be honest. You're going to say, I was fortunate enough to be able to pull out of the workforce to raise my kids, and I was able to do this for 15 years. And then you kind of make a joke like, let's not discount how much I had to organize and plan and schedule and budget and, and I volunteered here and I did there. So you have a tremendous amount that you did as a mom. It's just we don't live in a society that validates that. So that's kind of an easier one to address. Some of the recruiters and some of the research I did looking into this talked about for people who've pulled out of the workforce, you have a part on your resume that says something like consulting. And then underneath that, you put all the different things that you might have done, even if it was for free and it was volunteering, because then you're accounting for your time. Another thing is that you don't put the actual dates. So you don't ever say like November 2012 to December 2014, just put the year. So I was employed 2012 to 2014, and then 2014 to 2017 is where you would put that gap. So it doesn't sort of feel or look as long. They're like little tricky things that you do on the resume. I'm going to just read that's why I said take some notes. So I got this from a woman who does recruiting for Indeed.com, and we'll talk about websites in this. We'll talk about which websites to use. So this is what she said. If you left the workforce to be a caretaker, and I'm going to include, because there were definitely people in their questions that talked about having to pull out of the workforce for an illness, personal illness, you cannot, as much as you want to tell people that you pulled out of the workforce because you were ill, because they're going to go, ooh, what happened? What's going on? And are they really healthy enough to be back in the workforce? So that sort of disqualifies you right there. But I also want you to know that some of the data talked about over 90% of the population has been unemployed at some point in time, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So you don't want to worry about that. And people understand, people get laid off, people get fired, people pull out of the workforce. So here's some thoughts. If you were a caretaker for a family member, or if you had to pull out because you were personally ill, you want to say something like, I spent some time as a primary caretaker in my family, and during that time I was able to be there for my family, but always knew that I wanted to return to work, and now I'm ready to do that. Keep it really simple. So you basically want to come up with what you're going to say, keep it short, keep it simple, keep it very basic. Most employers are going to be respectful of that, and anyone that's going to push you more and more for more information, you would almost want to say to yourself, was that the kind of person I really want to be working for? Let's talk about laid off, which fortunately right now, good news, Bruins, we're in a booming economy. Employment is up. I don't know, it ebbs and it flows, but right now we're in a great economy time. So something about being laid off would be, my former employer underwent a restructuring that resulted in my position being eliminated. To be honest, it was a difficult time, but I left with the confidence that I developed important skills there and built strong relationships with my managers and colleagues. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to apply those experiences in my next job. So again, just really positive. Do not ever, ever, even if you hated your boss or you hated where you work, do not ever tell anyone that. You do nothing but be positive, because if you're going to be negative in an interview, they're going to wonder what you'll say about them. Okay, so if you are fired, and that's a tough one, and honestly, it happens to a lot of people. We're a lot of personalities in the workforce. We're a lot of personalities in a job. So you say something like, the company and I had different expectations, and reflecting on that experience, I realized there were some things I could have done differently. I learned a great deal, and I'm excited about the opportunity to bring that maturity to my next job. You know, everyone understands, because most people have been without employment for whatever period of time, they understand. And we're also, and I'll get to the personal reasons in a minute, we're also living in a time, for all of us that are a little bit older, this was wild to watch. My son's in the workforce now, my middle son, my younger, my older are not. But the wild thing to me is the way that this generation is moving in and around jobs at a clip. 3 months, 6 months, they move. Another 3 months, 6 months, they move. And it seems to be acceptable. Do I think it's acceptable in every industry? No, but I'm seeing it happening. So personal reasons would be, I was able to take some time off work to focus on myself. It was a time that prepared me to take on new challenges, and I'm incredibly excited about the opportunities that lie ahead, such as this position. So one thing that you can do to sort of start preparing, there was a woman, I mean, I'm just thinking of different ones that kind of jumped out. There was a woman that talked about pulling out of the workforce for a few years after the death of her husband. And she did a lot of self-work, but she also did a lot of volunteering. And so for you, if you're on this feed, or if you listen to it later, you just talk about all that volunteer experience. And for you, you be honest. You say, unfortunately, I lost my husband. This is what I've been doing to take care of myself, and now I'm ready to come back. People understand that. So if you took time off for personal reasons, you would say something like, I was able to take some time off, was able to focus on myself. It was a time that prepared me to take on a new challenge or challenges. And I'm incredibly excited about the opportunities that lie ahead, such as this position. So does that make sense? Everything comes out in a positive manner. Even if you don't believe it inside, you kind of have to act as if.
Yeah, to kind of, set that narrative, like you said, but keeping it brief.
Yeah.
So we got a great question in the live chat. They asked, how do you address working part-time for more than 5 years when you're seeking full-time employment in your cover letter?
Oh, I don't think you need to say anything in your cover letter. They don't need to know it's part-time. In fact, unless there's a point where you really need to say, I'm not sure you need to say that it's part-time. Because in your resume, you're not going to say part-time employment. You're just going to say where you're employed. If you're talking about it, again, addressing one of these things, I was helping family members. I was taking care of personal business. I was raising kids. So I've been part-time in the workforce, and now I'm ready to return full-time. And again, I'm going to go back to, and I probably will repeat myself here and there, but I'm going to go back to that idea of the more networking connections that you can make, the better off it's going to be, because it's much better for me to introduce, like, I'm just going to pretend Angela's been coming to me. We've been talking. It's easier for me to introduce Angela and say, like, oh, and here's her resume, but I know her and I really liked her, than it is to go in cold. Does that make sense?
Definitely. And actually, that's a great space in which our online career platform, UCLA One, can be great, because it's 25,000 Bruins. And as you mentioned, reaching out to people in the industry that you want to go into, but you may not know any Bruins in that area because it might be a different industry than you left when you took the leave. And so you can reach out to fellow Bruins, you can send them a message, you could even search by the company they work at, because maybe it's the company that you'd like to get into, and you could ask them questions or say, could I do an informational interview? And so in thinking about what you said around, go to conferences or connect with people, that I think can be a great tool for someone who doesn't know people in the area that they're trying to get into, but as you said, need to build a connection in order to submit the resume in a way that's not just coming in cold where they have no context.
Yeah, I agree. And anyone who's in there is willing to talk to a fellow Bruin, because that's why they're in there. They're in there to help. I mean, if you think about it, most people are willing to talk to another person about what they do and to be helpful, because we all pay it forward. Someone helped us, we pay it forward and help someone else. And that's just sort of the way it works. And it's also like you're part of the Bruin, it sounds so pokey. You're part of the Bruin family, but you are, and that's the connection.
Definitely. And thinking about what you mentioned earlier, of putting it on the resume as kind of consulting and then listing the pieces, we got a lot of questions about that, of kind of how do you frame those things that you've been doing during the leave on your resume. So just kind of specifically, is the consulting piece and then listing whether it's volunteering in the organizations or any other specifics around that, since it was a really popular question?
So let me, I'm just gonna peek at my notes for 1 second, because I did. So you guys, usually I don't even take notes, but this was so important. I took notes, and then I started worrying like, oh no, you can't rely on your notes. Then you're gonna get off track what's all together. Hold on 1 second. Where was, oh, here we go. So you're gonna emphasize activity. So you could say something like freelance work from, just pretend, 2015 to 2017. And then underneath there, you might say something like volunteered in, and again, say the capacity and where. You might say recertified or certified in whatever it was, a training. It could be took classes in this. So you don't want to lie. Like I just want to emphasize, don't lie. I can start telling you guys stories about clients. So I had this one client who we were working on his resume, and he didn't really like what I had helped him with. So he decided he would lie instead. And I didn't go very well for him, but that was what he chose to do. And, and I said, like, I don't, I have to be gentle. I'm like, I don't think lying is going to be the best way to go. Honesty is always better, not too honest, but you can say things like volunteered in, or a personal project on, or, and if you're dismissed though, you kind of have to wait to discuss that, because people are going to want to know. You can't really shove that under the rug, but it's a lot about, so let me think about moms that I've worked with. Hold on just a minute, because I've got a lot of returning to work moms in my practice. A lot of them talk to me about all the volunteer that they did with their kids and their kids' schools. And that's a fine thing to put in there. And actually, I shouldn't even say that, because a lot of men are stay-at-home dads now too, and they're returning to the workforce. So it's either way. It's trying to be as honest and write it in a way that sounds like the most professional that you can make it sound. There are, I don't know what UCLA offers for alumni for resume writing, but there are certainly people that are out there that are really good at framing how to say things on a resume.
Definitely. So one of the things you touched on a little bit earlier was kind of how much to disclose to a potential employer. And I know we got a lot of questions about that in terms of both, why they took the time off, and then when it is appropriate to bring that up. And so how would you address that? Is it when maybe they ask about it in the interview, or do you want to bring it up yourself to show you're not hiding it, or just kind of what's your advice around that space?
Two things. One, it's already going to be on your resume. So you're going to already address the gap on the resume. And whether or not you're going to, I'm a huge, huge believer of informational interviews. And remember, you can always be playful in both an informational interview and in an interview, because you don't want someone to think like, oh my gosh, that Angela, she's sure serious. I don't know if we want her here. So I'll give you an example. One of my first jobs was, so if you're older, you're going to remember this whole thing. There was a huge time, it's been a lot of years now, where companies were shutting down in California, and they were hiring these outplacement firms. And the outplacement firms would go in, they would give workshops, they would help these people rewrite resumes to get them back into the workforce. It was a painful time for thousands of people in Southern California. So I was doing an interview with them, and they asked me a question, and I was a little flustered, and I wasn't sure exactly of the answer. So I just sort of said something like, it may have been something around multitasking, and I said something like, oh, and I just gave, like, while I was thinking in my mind of what I really wanted to say, I said something like, oh, you mean getting married, buying a house, like all of those at once? And they laughed. And when you make people laugh, and I'm not saying go in and be a jokester, you bring down sort of the what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry, hold on. You bring down sort of that barrier between you and the interviewer. Sorry, my husband set up a bunch of lights in the office, you guys. Hold on, I'm bringing down the air conditioning again. So I have to turn it on and it goes up too low, it goes down too low, I get cold, then I turn it up and it gets warm. So sorry, I'm gonna have to put it up and down. So it brings down that barrier. So the other thing everyone should think about is, just like when you were younger and you were first going into the workforce, you came up with like that 60-second pitch, you need to do that again. And only this time, the 60-second pitch is going to include why you pulled out of the workforce. I needed to help out in the family business, and it took a couple of years to straighten everything out. But during that time, I gained skills in blah, blah, blah. And I'm so excited to be returning to the workforce, able to be here 100%, give my all. Or, I was fortunate enough to pull out of the workforce to raise my kids. In other words, you kind of want to come up with your 60-second pitch about who you are and what you want them to know about you, because that gives them enough information. And remember, these are from like when you work before to remember, people make a decision about who you are. And isn't it like something like the first 6 seconds they meet you? So a lot of it when you're going for an informational interview is, you're dressed nicely, you're clean, you don't have too much makeup on. I'm sorry, not makeup, perfume. You don't have clingy jewelry if you're a jewelry person, because everyone makes decisions really quickly. And as they're talking to you, they're saying in their own head, would Angela fit in here? Could I see her working with my crew? So there's so many moving parts when you're going back into the workforce. And then tell me if I got off on a tangent and I missed something.
No, that was great. In fact, just reminding me of a question that feels very relevant to this. When you mentioned, talking about kind of, the 60-second speech, is when oftentimes at the beginning of an interview, they might ask, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this position. So in that intro question of kind of giving a narrative of yourself, is that a time to address the gap and kind of include it as part of your narrative then, or to wait till a later point in the interview?
I would do it up front, because you're being transparent, and employers want you to be transparent. They don't want to sit there going, did Angela just tell me a little fib? I'm not sure. Well, never mind. I'm not going to like them, because, well, let me be honest. A lot of people are terrible interviewers, but you've got your savvy people that are good interviewers, and they're going to catch when you're nervous, when you're not quite telling the truth, so it's got to be addressed at some point. So you might as well just get it out of the way. And then you say, and I'm really excited to use all these skills I have. And then you start talking about your skills. And so here's a plug for taking a career planning class, working with someone at UCLA in the Alumni Association, seeing a private practitioner. When you do that, you're able to do a skills assessment. So it will help you look at what skills that you're good at that you want to use, because then you take that into the interview. I'm good at this and I want to be using this. If you've never taken one of my favorite assessments in the whole wide world is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's all about preferences. How do we make decisions? How do we interact with the world? How do we gather our energy? And there's a lot of verbiage in the interpretation and in all the written documents that go with the Myers-Briggs that gives you things to talk about yourself. So it's not like you have to invent some crazy, amazing thing. There's verbiage out there. It's just adapting it to who you are and making it sound comfortable. And you're going to practice it. You'll practice in front of your friends, in front of your partners. You'll take an interview that you don't really think you want the job to practice. Those are things that you want to do. And we'll wait, but I'm sure that we'll get to the whole idea of using recruiters, and we'll get all to that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that is great advice. A question that came in from the live chat, kind of related, I guess, to that, whether it's this, the intro that you give at the beginning, was that someone asked, what if you were sick? What would you say, or what would you frame in that kind of story or narrative?
Is the person who wrote that in, are you comfortable writing in now, like how long you were out, and were you sick, like all you were doing was dealing with your health? Because I guess it doesn't matter. They don't need to do that, because I'll address it. I'm just going to pretend like you or others were sick, and you could not do anything. And I think at that point you do the answer. Oh, drop my piece of paper. You do the answer that basically says, I took some time off to work and focus on myself and did some self-care while I was reflecting on what I wanted to do next. And after doing some research, this is the area I'm looking into. And so I'm here to find out more information. So you just sort of, make it just sound like you took time off for personal reasons, because, frankly, a lot of people are sick and a lot of people get sick, but an employer doesn't want to hear it because it makes them too nervous. So you can't kind of flat out tell them.
Yeah, that's helpful. So one of the things you mentioned, Vicki, was the different sites that someone might use, whether it was Indeed. What are your recommendations around that space, and just generally how to start the job search process once someone has made the decision to return to the workforce?
That's a really good question. So again, I talked to some recruiter friends, and they said that at this point, the two ways of actually really looking for work in recruiters' opinions, I don't know if that's in everyone else's opinion, but a lot of people is having a really robust and good LinkedIn page and having and uploading a really good resume onto Indeed.com, because employers, and another thing is, don't you ever pay for any of this. The employers are paying those two websites for the privilege of going through and looking for resumes that match the skills that they're looking for. So don't you ever pay for those. Those are two really good places to sort of upload resumes and to make sure that your LinkedIn page is really good. Make sure that your picture is almost like a professional looking picture. So don't have it like I wouldn't have. I'm wearing this honestly because it was a solid color and a lot of my summer dresses are fun, so I couldn't wear it for this. So wear something that's a little bit more formal. When one of my friends who's a career counselor was helping my middle son kind of with his resume and stuff, and she pulled up his LinkedIn page and she goes, "Were you in a bar when this picture was taken?" And he's like, "How did you know?" Well, because it's, even though it wasn't like a bar look, it looked like he was not looking professional. So that's really important. And I want to say something about Indeed.com. I always use Indeed.com as a gauge of what kinds of jobs are out there, because you can put in the search bar a topic of something that you're interested in doing, and it'll pull up all the jobs in your area or in California. So it's a really good way of seeing like, oh, the industry's robust right now, they're hiring, or, ooh, there's only 2 or 3, I've got to think about that. And again, I always go back to, I just had a client that last night that I said to him, from now on, every acquaintance that you meet, I want you to say to them, what do you do for a living and how did you get there? I've actually had clients get jobs this way, because then something engages them with the person that they're talking to, and all of a sudden the person's like, oh, you have skills in that? So sometimes that's a way of finding about things that you never even thought were out there that existed, is just to start asking people, what do you do and how did you get there? Also, I use LinkedIn a lot. I'll just go in and put the name of a profession and I'll see who comes up. And if someone's like a second or a third to me, I'll contact them. I'll email them. I'll explain, like, I'd like to have a conversation with you. Or if it's someone I know, I'll contact them on behalf of someone else and ask them, like, oh, I'm working with a client. Would you do an informational interview with them? Things like that.
I love that. And I like the idea of, as you said, whether it's LinkedIn or UCLA One, that, reaching out to people, you have nothing to lose, if you want to find out about that piece. But also what you said about asking questions, because what I've noticed is that oftentimes you know what your friend does, but you don't know what their network and what industries they're in. So by having a conversation about those things, you can learn that maybe they have a contact at your dream company, but if you don't talk to them about the career piece, they're never going to know that you're looking for those connections. So I love that. A really great question we got in the live chat came from Amy, and Amy asked, is it a good idea to apply for a lower level position in order to get back into the workforce after several years, or does that raise red flags for employers about your skills and abilities?
So Amy, I'm so glad you asked that, because that's one of the things that I definitely took notes on for myself. Someone wrote in something about being on, I'm mixing up the Wall Street person. Okay, so there was someone that wrote in and said something about, I'm having a hard time getting a job and I feel like it's because I have a PhD and I'm applying for jobs that don't require the PhD. Whoever wrote that in, take the PhD off your resume. I know that's like, oh, Vicki, I cannot believe you just told me that because I did all that work, but just take it off your resume for right now because clearly it's intimidating people. And if you think that's what's keeping people from interviewing you, get it off your resume. And another thing is that if you've pulled out of the workforce, the way you explain it is, look, I've been out of the workforce for a little bit of time and I need to refresh my skills. So think of it this way. When you go back to work and you know what you want and you're really focused, if you start at a little bit lower level, you're going to zoom forward very quickly because you know what it's like to be in the workforce and you're going to work hard. So yes, if you need to apply for something that's a little bit lower and work your way back up, that's sort of what you do. And that's okay.
So thinking about kind of that whole job search process, we got a really interesting question in the RSVPs around references and how to kind of approach a past employer after maybe you've taken that leave. And, do you connect with them and let them know you're searching again? And would you be a reference, or do you just assume that they still could serve as one? Just kind of, is there any nuances to it in this situation?
You need to contact every single person that you're going to ask to be a reference. And even though legally they can't really say a lot, you don't really know what they're going to say because honestly, people don't realize that there's things that they legally can and cannot say. So make sure, like if you're questioning in your mind, if you think they're a good person to ask, they're not. Make sure that the people that you are asking, you had good relationships with, that you performed well, and that they'll speak well of you. And yes, you absolutely need to tell people in advance that you're going to be looking for jobs. And then let's say you did an interview at, let's just pretend, you did an interview at UCLA and you're pretty sure you're to the point where they're going to check references. You need to tell them immediately, like email them and just say, hey, wanted to let you know I had a great interview at UCLA and they're probably going to be checking my references. So you might be getting a call. There's nothing like being called out of the blue and being totally shocked that this person gave your name and you had no idea. And then because you're a little flustered, the potential employer realizes you didn't know they were calling. And I've had that happen before.
So in thinking more too about the interview process, we got some questions around just kind of the do's and don'ts of interviews after a long break of some sort. So any that kind of spring to mind as, big do's and don'ts?
This sounds funny. So I'm going to back up a teeny bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I tell all my clients, when you are in the phase where you're getting ready to job hunt, you're getting ready to get back into the workforce, you need to set up a schedule for yourself. And I do this with my clients all the time. And this is sort of the coaching part. So I have different people in different phases. I have some people sort of doing the assessments. And just to tell you guys, I am, as you know, because I have the master's degree in career counseling, I'm a very traditionally trained career counselor. There are not a lot of us out there. I'm sure you've seen it. They're sitting at UCLA. They're sitting in a lot of educational, but they're not sitting in private practice very much. So what I tell my clients is you have to end up with a regular regimen. So for instance, you have a time, and this is, again, I'm just going to assume that there's no young kids involved, that, you're able to focus on you. You have to have a wake up time. I recommend, like, literally wake up time is 7. I'm just going to pretend. Okay, you guys, I'll tell you the truth. This is my way. This is my regimen. This is crazy. I know. I wake up at 4:35 every morning and I get at the gym at 5 a.m. and I spend a half an hour on the elliptical. And I come home and I shower and I eat and I get myself together. And 3 days a week, I go to Pilates from 7 to 8, and then I mosey on over to the college. So I'm not saying that you have to get up at 4:35 because, as you can imagine, I'm very tired by 9 p.m. So all of you on the East Coast, I'm with you. I'm like ready to go to bed on the East Coast. But it's the same idea that you have a regular nutritious breakfast, that because people in the process of trying to get back into the workforce oftentimes become disillusioned, a little bit depressed. They hit a lot of no's before they hear a yes. And think of it as the answer isn't no, it's just not yet. Right? So you haven't found that match yet. So don't take every rejection of like, oh, it was all about me and now I'm never going to find a job. So I'm going to go home and sit on the couch and eat bonbons and watch reruns of the old soap operas, which I hear aren't even on TV anymore. So you really want, that's why I'm always all about a schedule. Please know you cannot look for a job 8 hours a day. You know, if you think about sitting in a job, I don't work thoroughly 8 hours a day. You probably get a good, I don't know how many hours of work for me a day, but no one can work for 8 hours a day. So you work in blocks. So you do something for an hour, you take a break, you do something for an hour, you go for lunch with your friend. Like, in other words, you need to take care of yourself while you're in the process of looking for work. And now I may have gotten so distracted that I forgot the original question. Oh my gosh.
No, that's great. But it was interesting that you mentioned the schedule. One of the pieces of feedback I've sometimes gotten when talking to Bruins about this process was that when you mentioned, going to a conference or different networking, they may mention that financially they're not in a place to kind of invest in those different resources. So what would you say are some of the top kind of free things that they could take advantage of, whether it's LinkedIn, to really access the network and also try to build, kind of knowledge and skills about an industry when they're applying, if maybe they don't have the money, for example, for a conference?
Right. So if you see a conference and you really want to go, call the sponsoring organization, tell them that you're re-entering the workforce, and could you volunteer for them for part of the conference to cover your costs? Because a lot of people are going to say yes. They want to be, for the most part, they want to be inclusive. They don't want to be exclusive. They want to help people. So that's one thing that you can do. And I'm totally forgetting, there is a website. I may have to look it up and then get it back to you to put out there. There's a website that offers free classes. And I know there's more than one website. And for some reason, I'm picturing the email and I cannot remember the name of it. But you can go on there and take all sorts of amazing classes for free. They have professors from all over the country that are on this forum teaching classes for free. And if any of you Bruins have seen it, hurry and group chat us so that we can include it. I'm just blank. I can almost see it, so I might blurt it out later. And that's a way. And another thing is just really just talking to people. What do I need to do? And okay, so here's a plug for community college, you guys. Lynda.com, thank you. It's lynda.com, you guys. I peeked over, I was waiting for it to come up in the group chat. It's lynda.com, thank you. Community college is an inexpensive way to get education, and they're trying to compete more with those for-profit schools. So they're starting to offer really short-term classes. So that would be another way of getting really inexpensive classes. I'm telling you, if you're, everyone needs basic computer skills at this point. Everyone needs to know how to use their, email, internet, like really basic things. So there's tons of computer classes if you're feeling a little bit like, ooh, I'm a little bit out of the loop, to get back in.
So it's funny you mention that, because a lot of questions we got also were around kind of how long a gap is too long, or how do I address a 20-year career gap? So any advice specific to what they might consider a longer gap than others, and how you might approach that or frame that in the job search process?
So like I said before, the recruiters were telling me recency is 18 months. So if you've been out of the workforce for more than like 18 months, maybe 2 years, your skills are no longer recent. And that's like a big ouch. And especially, as you can imagine, in technology. So if you're addressing, I'm going to assume, and I might be wrong, that if you pulled out of the workforce 20 years ago, you're probably not going to go back to where you were. You're probably going to find something new, because you've had a tremendous amount of life experience. You've met all sorts of people. So I'm going to assume you're not going to go back. There was one person that did want to go back to what he was doing, or she, I obviously I can't tell. And for that person, I would recommend, if it's just been a few years, to contact friends that you still have in the industry and say, like, I know I've been out for a few years. I had things I needed to take care of, but I want to return. What do I need to do to get back into a more recent skill set to be able to get back into the workforce? And again, and I'm going to say, for all of you that don't like making phone calls, and it's all about practicing. It's like you make that first phone call and it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad. So you make another phone call and you plan it. You don't have to make 50 phone calls in one day. You can plan it to 3 phone calls in one day. It's taking everything in little bites. And so again, I love the website that you guys have where you can connect with fellow Bruins that are in these different fields, because they're going to be honest with you and they're going to give you their opinion. And so ideally what happens, I'm going to go back to this whole idea of informational interviewing. So for those of you that have been out of the workforce for a while, maybe not so while, this is basically how the informational interview works. I call Angela. I say, hey, I think I'm interested in doing what you're doing, but I'd like to learn more. May I have 15 minutes of your time? Or however many minutes, but you define the amount of minutes. If you can get them on Zoom, on FaceTime, or in person is even better. Because again, remember, Angela is going to make a very quick decision about how much she likes Vicki. And if she likes me, she's probably going to be a little bit more helpful. So the reason you want to have this informational interview and you define the time is you have a list of questions which are really basically, how did you get there? What's your background? And what's a typical day like? And what would you say are like the three most important values and skills that you use? Because don't let me forget to get back to the informational interview. I want to just jump off on values for a minute. The number one thing that makes people miserable in their jobs is a conflict in your values with those that you either work with or the workplace. And it could be that you fit in with the people you worked with and you fit into the workplace and something happens in your life. It can be marriage, death, a birth, a trip, a really amazing trip, classes you're taking for your own enjoyment, refinding a religion, whatever it is. And all of a sudden your values change, which makes the values that you have start to become in conflict with the people at work. It's not like you're fighting with them. You just realize that you're just not that comfortable anymore. And that's actually one of the number one reasons people leave their jobs. Personalities don't change that much. So if you've ever taken the Myers-Briggs type indicator, I could get into a whole discussion because this is one of my specialties, but your basic Myers-Briggs type is always going to be the same. It's just different parts of your personality come out as you get older. Skills, your basic skill set will always be the same, except for that you educate and work on. But the values is the one thing that changes. So part of the reason you want to ask some of those questions in an informational interview is to get a sense of, like, what do they need? And do I have those? And what would I have to do to get them? And then you make sure that you email a thank you note within a few hours. But here's the kicker, you guys. Take a business card and handwrite them a thank you note and snail mail it. It makes all the difference in the world. That's for an informational interview and for a real job interview. And then you go home and you have like whatever you want to do. You have somewhere that you're logging who you've talked to and what you've thought about. So then when you've evaluated and you're like, wow, out of all those things, I really like that job. I like that UCLA woman. And then you contact her later. It might be weeks, it might be months. And you say, hope you remember me. I've done a lot of research and I really think that your kind of company is what I want. Do you know if you guys have any openings or someone that you could refer me to? There's your foot in the door. This all sounds like really old-fashioned things, but when we're in the throes of trying to get back into the workforce, we forget about all these little things that we can do to help ourselves.
Indeed. And you mentioned the informational interview piece. Are there any mistakes that people make or just things, misconceptions maybe around how to approach and schedule one?
Make sure that, again, you ask for a set period of time that you're going to talk to them. You guys, this is a weird one, but turn your cell phone off and don't take it in with you. Like, leave it in the car. You do not, I'm going to pick up my cell phone for a minute. You do not be wanting to sit in the lobby like this. Because, oh, by the way, the administrative assistant that you checked in with usually will ask the employer will say, hey, Angela, what was that woman Vicki like when she was in the lobby? Oh, she had her head buried in her cell phone. So you want to make sure so I don't know that every career counselor would agree with me, but I'm always of the mind that you dress formally and professionally, no matter what the industry. Of course, you don't wear for women, a suit, unless that's the industry, or men, but you dress pretty formally. I don't care if the person across from you is sitting in cutoffs and a tank top. You're showing them how serious you are, and you're there to conduct business. And so You want to make sure, again, that you're just dressed appropriately, that your hair's not falling all over your face for a woman, that you don't have a ton of jewelry on. Leave the perfume at home because a lot of people have allergies. And be very clear with your questions, that you just have a short number of questions, that you're not in there asking, pick out what are the most salient things that you need to find out to make sure that it's going to be something that's interesting. Oh, and here's a really important thing. So let's just pretend you asked for 20 minutes, sounds reasonable to me. You're the time watcher. And at 15 minutes, I would say, Angela, thank you so much. We only have 5 minutes left. So let me ask you just two more questions. Even if Angela says to me, Vicki, it's okay, I've got more time. You say, oh, no. I totally respect your time. I'm out of here in 5 minutes. And you leave. Because if later on, Angela's stuck working late, she's going to go, God, if Vicki had left when she said she was going to, I wouldn't be sitting here at 5:45 at night trying to finish my work. So it's all these little like etiquette things. And yeah, so it's a lot about that.
That is excellent advice. So as we wrap up, in thinking of all the research you did and the recruiters you talked to, is there anything that we didn't cover that you feel like is really important, or just kind of big mistakes that people make, or things that they shouldn't be concerned about or shouldn't be afraid of? Because a lot of people expressed, just fears and anxiety around different pieces. Is there anything that came up in your research that we didn't touch on?
I'm going to look through my notes in just a second just to make sure I got everything. But one of the things, you guys, you just have to sort of do it. You have to get out there. If you mess up, oh, well, you messed up. But every time you interview or you talk to someone and you put your foot in the mouth, you go, ooh, ouch. And then you go, oh, well. And another thing that I always have to remember and remind people is people are really, I'm not saying this to be mean. We're all selfish, self-centered, and egotistical. We're all really concerned with ourselves. So don't worry so much if you make a mistake, because unless you really did something horrible, they're never going to remember that, And so you really have to sort of it's practice. You put yourself out there and you practice, and you make mistakes and you go, okay, all right, that didn't work. Let me pivot it this way. Oh, oops, that didn't work. Let me do it this way, because that's how we learn. Let me just take a quick look at my notes, because like I said, sorry, I know it's dead air.
No, that's it. One of the things I'll mention to the audience. One of the things I'll mention to the audience while you're looking through notes is just that if you Bruins that are watching, if any of you would like to connect with Vicki directly, you can visit her website. We'll post the link in the live chat right now. And so you can reach out to Vicki and connect with her. As we mentioned earlier, she has a private practice in the career counseling space. And so please feel free to connect with her.
So one thing I want to point out and just remember is with your skills and your experience, for the person that said, like, is it okay for me to go back and take something at a lower level? You're going to climb back up that ladder pretty quickly. Remember, people are changing careers and jobs more quickly. My middle son, he left his first job, you guys, I swear to you, after 3 months. I was horrified. I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, I tried it. I don't like it. I'm moving. I was like, oh my gosh. I've got the Utilize UCLA one. Again, highlight any experience that you have. Spin it. I tried this. It worked. It didn't work. This is what I learned. Because they're usually going to ask about things like that. And just remember, like, put your story together. You don't want to go into an interview and be shocked that they're asking you a story, even in an informational interview. Like, hey, what's your story? And you're like, I don't know. And again, smile, be friendly. Those are the things that they're going to remember. It's all about that first impression.
Well, and like you said, the narrative that you mentioned at the beginning with the different scenarios, don't, as you said, be thinking of that when they ask you the question, but have thought through it and be ready for how you're going to tell the story of, whatever that gap was or what you're looking to do next, so that it's not the first time you're saying it.
Exactly. And, oh gosh, we'll talk about resumes for just a minute. There's the chronological resume, right? The typical one that you put the dates. Another way of doing it is the functional one, where really you're talking about, it's more of a skills-based resume, to be honest. And so there you're highlighting your skills with your employment history underneath. Different employers like to see different things, but that's another way of really highlighting your skills with your employment history at the end. For those of you Bruins like me who have been out of college for a really long time, make sure to take the year you graduated from college off, because people also asked about ageism. That's one way, is that you don't put your years on there anymore when you went to school, because then they can't go, oh, Vicki graduated in 85. She started, oh, 55. We don't want to hire her. So we all look better than the generation before us. So most of us don't look our age, and that's also an advantage. And another thing that you all talk about is, I'm a mature adult. I'm back in the workforce. I'm here to work hard. And that's something employers understand and appreciate.
I love that tip, and especially about the resume. It's a simple thing, but really important to combat that, as you mentioned. Well, thank you so much, Vicki, for your thoughtful advice and guidance. This has been such a popular topic, and we so appreciate your insights. To everyone who's watching, thank you again for joining us and participating in the discussion. If you missed a portion of tonight's event and you want to share it with others, you can find this recording and all episodes of the Bruin Career Insights series on the UCLA Alumni YouTube channel. And don't forget to send us your ideas for future speakers and topics. Is there a specific career topic that you're interested in and would like to learn more about, such as, you'd like to make a career pivot, but you're not sure where to start? Send us your ideas. Our email address is careerprograms@alumni.ucla.edu. And as I mentioned, if you want to connect with Vicki, you can visit her website, and we'll post the link in the live chat. Thank you, Vicki, and to everyone for being a part of tonight's discussion. And once again, thank you to our Blue, Gold, and Life members for making events like this possible. We'll see you again soon for a very special episode of Bruin Career Insights that's taking place on September 13th, which is Alumni Day Online. We'll discuss creating a great company culture with Pay Scout. Alumni Day Online will be filled with innovative and original programming, so be sure to tune in. Have a great evening and go Bruins!
Thanks, you guys.